Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today we've got a special guest on the show. We're joined by Howie Jacobson, who's an executive coach, author, ultimate frisbee player, self-proclaimed behavior nerd, and host of the Plant Yourself podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Howie's new book, You Can Change Other People, the 4 steps to help your colleagues, your employees, and even your family up their game. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. I'm so happy to be here.
It's great to see you, and also to have another podcaster on the show. At least I know the audio is going to be great.
Yep. I've overspent on microphones like most of us end up doing, right?
How many have you gone through now? You're like, what, 500 plus episodes, right? You've probably gone through 100 mics maybe in that time.
Well, at least 5, but like in my Amazon wish list, I've got, the Electro voice and the Neumann and like
all of them. Yeah.
The thing is, I don't think anyone can tell that there's been any improvement since like the cheap one I got, the first one that was like, $70. Like, I don't think they sound any better.
Yeah. You say that, but then when you put a pair of headphones on as a listener and you hear a podcast and it's really bad audio, it's like, video you can get away with, but terrible audio, kind of unacceptable.
Speaking of terrible audio, my neighbor is rototilling his garden about 15 feet away from me. So I hope the
no, you're good.
The noise rejection of this condenser mic doesn't make that horrible.
It's all good. I gave you kind of a brief intro, but tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah. So I was a school teacher for many years. And as a school teacher, you don't realize what you learn in terms of applicable skills, because you think like all I know how to do is like grade papers and discipline kids and like be creative. But in fact, the ability to hold a classroom attentive is the ability to, speak at events, and the ability to create a lesson plan is the ability to understand what are the gaps in people's learning and performance. So while I was teaching, I was also going back to school for a doctorate in health studies, and I ended up focusing on stress and stress management. My dissertation was basically applying these principles in 3 different school settings. And I got great results with the kids. And so I wrote my dissertation and I got my degree. And then I just, out of curiosity, went back to those schools, and it was as if nothing had ever happened, right? There was like nothing that I had done, which demonstrably made these kids happier, reduced their physical symptoms of stress, their emotional symptoms. It was like you build a sandcastle and you go back to the beach the next day and it's gone.
Yeah.
And that kind of depressed me because I put a lot of work into it. It had worked and there was value to be had. And I realized I have no idea how to sustain anything in an organizational setting. And that's luckily right when I met Peter Bregman, who introduced me to this thing called coaching within an organizational model. How do you create change? And, as a school teacher, I thought the way you create change was going in and teaching people stuff, and then they would do things differently. And realizing that giving people information is important and not sufficient. And creating structures for change, like telling people, okay, here's how things are going to be done now, is insufficient. But then there's this additional thing called coaching. And coaching within, what our friend and mentor Marshall Goldsmith called the stakeholder-centered approach, that you bring people and organizations to change in predictable ways that support them in the things they want to do, as opposed to me imposing what I think is best or what I know is best for them.
Yeah.
And so my career since then has been really fascinated with how do we get people to want to change? How do we support them in those changes? How do we interact with them so that we and they are both collaborating and happy and better off than if we hadn't met?
Yeah. I absolutely love this topic, and we always come back to it because it's we all know, for example, how to lose weight or how to eat healthy, and we can kind of make a huge list, but we still don't do it. And we self-sabotage, and the psychology and everything behind that has always been such a fascinating topic to me, and an ongoing frustration in many ways, both personally but also for family, friends, and colleagues that are around me as well. When did you and Peter decide to write this book? And obviously the title, who came up with that? Because I love the title, by the way. When I first saw it, it made me smile. You can change other people. It's pretty out there, pretty in your face.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm not sure it was the right decision. So like I've gotten feedback from like my son saying, I hate that title and it makes me suspicious of you when you talk to me now.
Yeah, but that's what people are talking about it, right? It's a conversation starter.
Yeah. So I can't remember exactly who came up with the title. We had a lot of discussions about it, of course, with our editor and with people, we were close to who understood what we were doing in the book. But basically at a certain point, like we realized that the message of the book was everyone says you can't change other people, and that's not true. So that kind of became the opposite. We realize that we have conversations all the time that help people become better versions of themselves. And so, semantically, like, no, you can't change someone else against their will. But how many times do we want to do that versus like the 80% or 90% of the time, someone wants to get better, and the way we interact with them actually gets in their way rather than helps. We're not even neutral. So like, you have a friend who wants to lose weight and you say something like, hey, like really helpful, like, hey, are you sure you want that dessert? And all of a sudden you're not a supporter, you're a critic. And they're like, hell yeah, I do.
Yeah. Well, let's give everyone an overview of the 4 steps first, and then we'll kind of jump into each of those and discussing a little bit more that you discuss in the book.
Yeah. So the four steps are based on our understanding of what people need in order to change, and recognition that the way that we usually talk to people actually deprives them of those things, which is ownership, independent capability, emotional courage, and what we call future proofing, that you can think of as resilience. So the first step is to shift yourself from critic to ally. So like what I said, like, whatever you say, they're not perceiving you as a critic, as someone who thinks they're wrong. Right. So it's so easy to speak to people in a way that they interpret as, oh, you think I'm wrong. You've made me wrong.
Yeah. Right? The defense mechanism goes up, right, immediately.
Yeah. Right. Like you've challenged a self-image that they don't really hold, that they're trying to uphold. And we can defend our self-image like as fiercely as we would defend our families.
Yeah, and even when the person is doing it out of good, from a good place, right? They're saying it from a good place, but you immediately take it as someone attacking you. How do we then flip that to becoming an ally? What does that look like? First
of all, doing some work on ourselves. Like let's say, there's a colleague who is self-sabotaging in a particular way, and you like this colleague, you care about them, and you know that they're messing up in this way. It may be costing your division some business or credibility, and it frankly annoys you. Let's say this person just loses their temper in meetings a lot, right? Just so to make it concrete. So the first thing we have to do is, if you can't just follow the steps to linguistic advice in the book if your energy is, I'm angry at this person and they need to stop because they're messing up. So first thing we have to do is get right with ourselves. Like, how can I be an ally for this person? So start about thinking about, let's say, if I'm angry at myself for the way I'm angry at them, right? Like I keep making snippy comments that they're taking the wrong way. So now I'm mad at myself. So the first thing I want to do is empathize with myself. So what do I want that's, for them, for me? And you'll see that a basic understanding that I have about human nature is that every single person all the time is trying to satisfy a valid need, right? And when we do things that are sabotaging that, it's because we're making a mistake. We've got a pattern. We don't see something. Even evil people doing evil things are trying to satisfy some basic human need for recognition, for approval, for love, for connection. So I want to find that in myself, and I want to find it in the other person. Like, they're getting angry at meetings, they're snapping at people. What's the positive intent? If you were to ask them why they're doing it, they probably wouldn't say, because I'm a jerk and because I want people to get angry or because I want to put people down. They're saying, I care about these ideas, or I have certain standards that I want that are important to me that I want other people to uphold. Like, there's a positive intent. So the first thing is to kind of get in touch with what that might be. You don't have to be right, but just to shift our own mind so that we're not approaching them like, you're broken in some way and it's my job to fix you.
Yeah, it's so interesting looking at it, flipping it to what is their positive intent. I would never think that. in that
it's
scenario,
really hard
right?
to think that.
Yeah, right. Someone's angry, but you're right. Behind that, they could be like, I'm really passionate about this. This is why I'm getting upset, because no one's listening, and I think this is really important, and I care about it. But you don't think about it. You kind of immediately go to, they're a jerk. Like, yeah.
And that's why it's important to do it for ourselves, because in a way it's easier. Like, I understand when I behave badly, like I can always excuse myself because of something, right? Like, right. So the question, it's a beautiful question. Like, what do I have to care about for me to get angry here, or for me to get frustrated, or for me to do whatever?
Interesting.
There's something that's some boundary that's being violated, or some value that I want to uphold that's not being upheld, that makes me angry, scared, frustrated, any of what I would think of as negative emotions. And so, like, for example, if I am speeding, it's because I have a very important meeting to get to. If someone else is speeding, they're a jerk.
Yeah, interesting.
Right. So let's see if we can practice applying the same standard to other people's behavior as we might attribute to our own. See that they are a person trying to do good, aligned with what that good is, and then we can begin the actual steps of trying to approach them as an ally.
But just to be clear, though, is not all, yes, assuming positive intent, but is there a situation where it's not always what they're coming from a positive place?
I don't think it's useful to,
even consider
if you
that.
want to change them. I think it's important to assume positive intent, even if you can't figure it out, right? If you want to assume negative intent, then
there's no good's coming out of that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, why are you trying?
Yeah, there's no point. Yeah. So once you've done that, you've kind of had that self-reflection, you've had that conversation, you're assuming positive intent. What's the next step? So
the next step is to have a conversation with them. And there's many different ways to do it. Let's take the hardest scenario where you have to initiate. They've not come to you. Right? It's easy if they say, hey, Chris, I don't like the way I'm behaving in meetings. Can you help me? Right? Then you're like, okay. Right? Or they complain. I can't stand how everyone is responding to me in meetings. That, like, a complaint is actually an opening. I used to get really mad at complaints. Like, I had in my head, like, you're not taking responsibility, you're punting on agency. But now I see a complaint as a silver platter opportunity to say something that will lead us to a conversation. Right. But the hardest one is they haven't said anything. They don't want your help. It's none of your business. And you want to inject yourself. So the way we want to do that is to sort of lead with the positive punchline, right? Like, hey, I would love to see you be really effective in meetings, right? It's hard to argue with that, right? Instead of saying, I would love to see you stop being such a jerk in meetings, right? Let's make it positive. I'd love to see you be more effective. Like, I see you in these meetings and I can see what you're trying to accomplish. And I would love to see you get that. So that's starting out in a positive, because our brains can hear positivity, right? Yes. They don't immediately go into defensiveness. Then we have a 3-part formula for getting permission. It goes empathy, confidence, permission. So empathy is to just say, I can see how hard you're working, and I imagine it's pretty frustrating when the meetings don't produce the results you want. So like all someone has to say is, boy, that sounds hard.
Yeah.
Right. So empathy. So we're on the same page. Then confidence, and expressing confidence is inherent in the process, because if you didn't think they could change, you wouldn't bother. Right. So like I've seen you be incredibly effective, or I've seen you make big shifts for strategic gains. Like, I know you can do this. And then the third is, I love this phrase. I got it from Peter, my co-author. Would you like to think it through together?
Oh, I love that. Such a good question. Yeah.
Right. It's so much better than, and you know, one thing that Peter has taught me over the years is the power of just subtle shifts in language.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right?
Well, and it's what you say. Like imagine if I'd said, would you like some help with that? Versus, would you like to think it through together?
Yeah, it's such a different, yeah, I'm with you, I agree. It's something I learned in sales. I spent most of my career in sales, and I realized the way I was framing and phrasing my questions, like the difference that you just said there, became so powerful and in conversations as well. So I love it. So can we recap that one more time, those 3 steps? Yeah.
Empathy, confidence, and permission.
Where do you see that people typically go wrong on those 3 steps?
Well, I'll just talk about myself, right? Because right, we write books to tell ourselves what we need to know. For me, empathy is really easy when I'm not emotionally invested. Like, I'm a coach. I am very empathetic. It comes naturally to me. When my clients are frustrated, I immediately go to empathy, and it makes them feel better. And it, you know, sort of co-regulates us neurologically. I can talk all about the science behind that. But when it's like a family member or someone who, when I'm invested in the situation, it's really hard for me to express empathy, because it's like, and it feels stingy. Like, I don't want to empathize with you.
I get it. Yeah, it's harder, isn't it? Yeah,
right?
You're right.
And then, and the other thing is, when if I ask the question, would you like to think it through together? Would you like to think this through with me? Or do you want to talk about it? If I am not willing to accept no for an answer psychologically, I'm going to ask the question wrong, right? And people can tell. Right? If is it a genuine, open-ended question, you know, and I'm willing for you to say, no, I really don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, okay, cool. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. To be able to accept their no is really important. And I see people make that mistake. Like, it's almost like, no, oh, actually, it was a rhetorical question.
Oh, you can't.
Yeah. You didn't actually, I didn't actually give you permission to say no to this. Yeah. And this is, this can become a big problem if you're their manager, right? Because we can confuse the different types of authority that we do and don't have over people. If you are my employee and you're doing something, I am accountable for your behavior, for the results you get. So, but you don't have to talk to me about it, but you do have to, live up to standards. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. That being said, here's what I expect from you.
Okay.
And if you want help talking about it, I'm here. I can't force you to have this conversation. I can, however, set this standard and this boundary. It was like, our networking friend, Alan Mullally, who when at Ford would say to people, basically, either you do it this way or you've decided to fire yourself. Right? Like that's fine. There's nothing wrong with the way you're doing it, but that can't happen here. So you get to decide. And it was, it's a way to speak it in a way that doesn't judge. It doesn't make people wrong. It just says, like, this is how we're doing it here.
Yeah.
Right. So to be able to take a no for an answer is really important to this process.
Mm-hmm. Have you found that this is kind of a muscle that you've built, that you're training? Because it's so easy for us to jump in and say the wrong thing or react, because we've been doing it our whole lives. Is that something have you caught yourself in moments over the last few, since writing a book where you're like, oh, there we go.
only every day.
Yeah, I bet.
Because here's what it is. There's like, one of the reasons we don't acknowledge other people's emotional states is that we don't want to feel that emotional state. And, human beings are probably the most social animals there are at this sort of higher mammalian level. Like, we can't live on our own. We are so attuned to each other's emotional states. And if there's an emotional state, if I don't want to feel sadness or guilt or shame, and you're feeling that, I will shut myself down. So I will turn off the receiver. And so then if I'm not willing to feel it in my own body and in my own experience, then I literally will not see it or feel it in you. And then my empathy will be, totally stage managed. Like, oh, express empathy here. Yeah. As opposed to, like, I can think of times when I've been furious, when I've been terrified, when I've been guilt-ridden, when I've been wallowing in shame. Like, all that is not unusual. It's part of my life experience. And so part of the work is to be able to feel it within myself without having to run away from it or avoid it. Mm-hmm. And that's the muscle. Like, the muscle of saying empathetic things is pretty easy to do, but the muscle of being willing to feel things that I don't want to feel, so that I can be with you, right? If you start feeling scared, and I am unable to feel scared, then I'm going to change the subject, or I'm going to skate over it, or I'm going to leave the conversation, or I'm going to try to change you right away for my own comfort.
I can relate to that. I'm sure everyone listening can relate to it too. I was just thinking about, tough moments in my personal marriage and life where we're having arguments, and I want to just leave the conversation because I don't want to feel it, right? You don't want to feel the pain or the anger or the whatever emotion may be. So you try and get out the conversation, physically leave the room or whatever it may be, right? Because you don't want to feel it. What's the science behind that? Is it really just sort of obviously it doesn't feel good, so no one wants to do that, but is there anything else deeper than that?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is, so, how we evaluate a situation is based on the impressions, the input, the sensory data we're getting in that moment against a database of our history. Like, somebody who is a surfer would see a wave and interpret it as a fun opportunity. Someone else who's not a surfer would be out in the ocean, see a wave, and think, oh my God, it's going to kill me, right? So we interpret current inputs based on our history, based on does this look dangerous? So all of us have various, examples from our lives, specifically from our childhoods, where we didn't get what we needed in the moment, or we were shamed or yelled at, and so we have these historical templates that we bring to the present moment. And so if I say to you, I really think you can do better in meetings, you can immediately go into fight or flight, because the part of your brain that lights up when you hear that is the part that felt threatened. Yeah. Let's say by, if you had a parent, like when we're little, we rely on our parents for our lives. So we will go through any sort of machination to get approved of.
Yeah.
Right. So we have these historical templates, and they get locked into our nervous systems. And so, like, one of the reasons empathy is so powerful is that it's a very powerful key to turn people from fight or flight into a feeling of safety. Like, the most important thing I need to do in any conversation is make the person feel safe if I want to move them in any way.
Yeah. You made me think back to my childhood, actually, while you were saying that, because I was thinking, why do I struggle whenever I'm having like an argument or something like that, it gives me kind of flashbacks to when I was younger, because there was unfortunately a lot of domestic violence in my house. So my mum and dad used to argue a lot, and as a kid, seeing some of those things were obviously traumatizing. So now even when I see strangers on the street having an argument, I get super anxious. I'm not even in the conversation. It could be across the road. And I start feeling really overwhelmed, anxious. And because again, that sort of trauma from hearing it constantly growing up. So, and similar when I have an argument with my wife, for example, or anyone, it brings back those emotions from when I was a child, and I want to just escape or leave the room and get out of it as soon as possible because of that. And that's something I didn't even recognize until a few years ago. I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And I was like, made that connection. I was like, oh, okay. Like any type of conflict. So you're right. It's kind of indexed in you and sticks with you, right? As well.
Yeah. And one of the most powerful insights that I have learned about managing that in myself, like I might think, oh, I need like 20 years of therapy to like erase that trauma. And well, I love therapy and it's helped me a great deal. In the moment, like we don't have to erase things or overcome them so much as recognize that we are bigger than the experience, that we contain. So if you think, oh, those people are fighting over there, I am anxious. Am has created an equal sign. I equals anxiety. Whereas if you say, I'm aware of anxiety in my body, or I'm noticing anxiety, or I'm thinking this is intolerable, then all of a sudden the I becomes something that can observe it and can contain it. Like, oh, there's this part of me that's feeling all that, and that's not the totality of me, and I have degrees of freedom to act without having to run away or make it stop.
No, I and that's something over the years I've gotten better at, because I still suffer from anxiety and panic attacks I did growing up. And now you're right, you kind of like can step out of the situation and kind of look down on it and have that conversation like you just said. And I would talk myself through it and I'd be like, oh, I'm fine. It's okay. Yeah. It took a long time to identify that and go through that process you just described. A lot of work goes into getting to that point of identifying those triggers. And as you said, the I am part and connecting it is super important. As well. I want to switch gears a little bit because there's something you spoke about, which I thought was really interesting. I think our audience would gain value from is you talk about what the difference is between performance reviews and performance improvement. So I'd love to hear more about that.
When you think about like, what's the purpose of an annual review or, a quarterly performance review or any sort of review of how you've done? The purpose isn't to understand the past. Like, understanding the past is a means to improve in the future, right? Like we're not in the business in HR of being historians, right? We're in the business of driving performance improvement on the individual level, on the team level, on the organizational level. And the thing about feedback is that it has become kind of reified as here's how we do performance improvement, is we tell people how they've done. And understanding how you've done and seeing, the gap between what was expected of you or what was hoped for from you and what you actually did in any given situation or overall is part of it can guide us, but it's not the same as how do I help people improve performance? So there's like, companies will spend literally millions of dollars, as many of your viewers and listeners know, coming up with what's the competency model and how are we going to evaluate employees against that competency model. And then we're going to have these conversations to tell them in all the ways in which they fall short, right? So here's your areas that you're stellar at, and like no one's even listening to that because we're waiting for, okay, and here's where you need to improve.
Exactly.
And so immediately we're in back to that fight or flight, like, okay, I'm bracing for what I've done wrong. The truth is what they've done wrong may not even affect performance. Like it may be irrelevant to what we're trying to achieve. So what we're arguing for is let's create performance improvement plans. And then whatever feedback needs to come out of that is in the context of here's what I want you to do better. So, which I think it brings like this, we've only talked about step one, shifting from critic to ally. Yeah. Step two is identify an energizing outcome. And so like, this is like, what we want is before I go into your history, I want to know, what do I want you to be doing? And then in collaboration with you, what do you want to be doing? What does success look like from both of our perspectives, from our shared perspective? What would be a great year for you coming up? What would it look like? What are the behaviors? What are the outcomes? And based on that, then we can look at the history. And the history now is in the service of a positive future, as opposed to a kind of, a confessional of your past sins.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Yeah. It's really, really, really interesting. Why do you think companies still operate in that model? Because I think many of our audience would 100% agree with you, but yet they still operate in that model.
It's funny, asking what's the outcome you want is the most obvious question often, and it's the most powerful. And it's really hard to think of in the moment because we are so used to being reactive. If someone says something to me that all of a sudden gets me a little bit upset or angry, it's hard for me to think of, okay, what's the outcome I want here, right? Instead, I'm going to respond to what they said, as opposed to think about what I want and respond based on that. So, if someone says something mean to me, I'll say something mean back, or something, snippy or sarcastic or avoidant, as opposed to asking, what do I want out of the situation? It might be, I want to understand where they're coming from. It might be, I think they may have some really useful feedback for me that I want to be able to hear. It might be, I want a close relationship with them, and this feels like a threat to that. But it's really hard in the moment to think about outcomes. I think that's just kind of how our brains are wired. Yeah. So, we don't write books telling people, how to lie down when you're tired, right? We write books telling people how to do things that don't come naturally.
Yeah.
So I think it's just hard.
Yeah. No, makes sense. How do we then balance that sort of yin yang of strength and weaknesses? Because for so many years, I would put so much time and energy on focusing on my weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Whereas over the last maybe 5 years, I've kind of flipped the opposite direction and actually just doubled down on my strengths, which I've seen, which has been a game changer for me, and actually just forget about most of the things that I saw or that I was told I was weak at, because I would obsess over those things and realize that actually, let me focus on these parts, to the point where I actually sat down with my co-founder and both of us kind of outlined them, and we just don't focus on anything that's our weaknesses. And I lean purely into my strengths, and he does the same, which happen to be my weaknesses, which is great as well. And it works out very well. But if it's for so long, and for so many people I speak to focus so much on those weaknesses as opposed to leaning into their strengths. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, leaning into your strengths is useful for several reasons. One is it just gives us confidence. It makes us feel like, oh yeah, I can do this, right? And self-efficacy is probably the biggest predictor of future performance of anything. If I think I can do something, I'll probably, when I want to, I'll do it, right? Another is that our strengths are what make us unique, right? So focusing on understanding what are my strengths can help me lean into them in ways that can help my career, can help my team, can help the organization. So it's good to know what they are, right? So, like the squirrel should be climbing the tree and getting the nuts, right? And if they don't understand that, they could spend all their time trying to, I don't know, catch fish in the pond or something. Yeah. In terms of the yin yang of weaknesses, I do 360s for my clients. And so I'll talk to 12 to 20 people, and I'll ask them all, about what are this person's strengths and what are some pieces of advice for them. And through that, lots of weaknesses come up, oh, they could do this better, or I would like them to work on this. And I'll get with 20 people, I'll get a list of 30 different things that this person could improve. And we don't have infinite time. And so what we do is what's one thing you want to work on here? But it's always we always talk about what's the outcome you want. So if the outcome is I want to be more of a strategic leader when we say, well, what's getting in the way of you being that more strategic leader? So, first of all, from your strengths, you're good at strategy, you're good at communicating strategy. And the weakness is time management. I'm too busy dealing with low quality issues. I'm too busy dealing with noise versus signal. So then that's the one weakness that we need to address in order to leverage the strengths. So, Peter puts this beautifully. How can we leverage your strengths and mitigate the impact of your weaknesses? But instead of just being throwing darts at a dartboard and saying, hey, let's work on time management this week, and let's work on communication of difficult conversations next week. Let's just focus on the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference, that will unleash your strengths in a way that can really move the needle.
Yeah, we've mentioned feedback is a tough one. What are some of the best ways to get feedback, to ask for feedback in your experience?
Yeah, well, we wrote the book assuming that you're going to give feedback to people who don't want feedback, right? Because but there's always that person who's like, hey, tell me how I'm doing. Give me feedback. Hey, I messed up here. What can I do better? So just, for ourselves, if we want to improve, we can, the more tolerant we are of other people speaking poorly and not following the steps of you can change other people, the more we're going to learn. So one thing I got very early was this idea from informatics or IT is it's all information, right? So if I'm looking for information, if I'm looking for market intelligence, I will look, I'm not going to say, oh, I don't want to hear about what people like about our competitors, because that's going to make me feel bad. The more I know about that, the more I can be effective in the marketplace. And similarly, the more I understand about how people perceive me, right, the more effective I can be in influencing the outcomes that I want. So for one thing, it's really important to understand everything is perception. And perception, we don't care about facts or what is real. When I coach people, they'll say, and these people are trying to sabotage me, or this conversation, I was blindsided, or that's unfair. And I never want to argue about, is that true or is that not true? First of all, I have no idea. It's very easy for me to get captured by my coachee and think all of a sudden think yeah, they're right and everybody else is an idiot, right? That's human nature. But instead, I really focus on a phrase that I got from acceptance and commitment training called workability, which is when you think that thought, what do? How do you behave? Right? Is that a workable thought? Is that a thought that helps you? So if they're all idiots, does that thought help you accomplish what you want to accomplish? And if not, well, what's another thought? You can hold that thought, just like you can hold that feeling. Okay, I'm aware of the thought, they're all idiots. And what else is going on, right? So if I want to get feedback from other people, to prepare myself by saying, I'm just getting perceptions, and those perceptions aren't true or false. They are simply perceptions. And based on those perceptions, I can then take steps to achieve the things that are important to me. So in a way, it's sort of subsuming your ego in the moment.
Yeah.
The same way we began this conversation by talking about it's hard to eat well, even though we know what to do. In the moment, I want to feel good. And this cheeseburger and this chocolate bar is going to help me do that. So not hearing other people's negative perceptions of me will make me feel good, but it's not going to give me the career health that I want.
No, definitely. Well, look, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to get the book in everyone's hands. So if you're listening right now, make sure you go grab a copy of the book. Where is the best place people can connect with you, and also grab a copy of the book, listen to the podcast as well?
Yeah. So the book you can find, anywhere books are sold. It's called You Can Change Other People. I have a not so pretty website, but is workable, as we say, at askhowie.com, ASKHOWIE.com. And the podcast, which is largely about health and wellness on an individual and a planetary basis. So it's a little bit of a side project from the organizational work that I do, is at plantyourself.com.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. And I've definitely learned a lot today. I'm sure everyone else has. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a really fun conversation.
Loved it. See you soon.